welcome to John's Jeep Garage. This video is about TPM basics. It's part 2 in a series dealing with sources of contamination, hard to reach places, and tagging. Thank you for watching. Hi, welcome to John's Jeep Garage. This is a part 2 video in a 2-part series on TPM. If you have not watched part 1, I may recommend that you go back and watch that video first. Because we'll only have a few things that we're referring back to in the first video. But this video specifically is to continue our discussion on TPM and how I apply that total productive maintenance methodology to really ensure the lives of my Jeeps are extended and that I always have them in top operating shape. And the principles we discussed in the first video were really about cleaning to inspect. And then this video, we're going to talk more about inspecting to detect and detecting to correct, and what we do when we find issues and how to continually monitor them and look for a couple things. Number one, an SOC. That is a source of contamination. So for example, you clean everything up, you think your Jeep is fine, you pull it in the garage, and the next day you see oil on the ground. And you start looking, and if it was a dirty Jeep, you may have old oil everywhere, and it's very hard to understand where that source of that leak is coming from. So thus, source of contamination. If your Jeep was spotless and clean yesterday, you should find it easier to detect where that source is. And so you want to eliminate SOCs, because if you eliminate sources of contamination, you then aren't going to have to clean it up. And so, kind of on a basis thing, if you go back to the very first video, the reason you're cleaning it and you don't want to have dirt or excess oil or grease or any other type of buildups on your equipment or vehicle is because that can lead to forced deterioration. That can lead to premature breakdown of equipment. So SOCs will be the first thing we cover, and then one more, HTRP, hard to reach places. Even though it says in the acronym REACH, it really also means see. So for example, inside an air filter housing, you really can't just open up a hood and clean inside your air filter housing because you can't see it. So it's really considered hard to reach unless you open it up, take the guard and the cover off, and then inspect it and clean it. So it's a hard to reach place, and we classify that as an HTRP. Or a belt that's behind a guard and you can't see if the belt is worn. Well, that's a hard to reach place, or it's hard to see. We don't want to remove guards and in a normal operating condition, but those are things we have to identify and find ways so we know how to inspect and the frequency in which we're going to inspect them to be able to detect if anything is wearing down before a small interruption or issue becomes a larger one. Well, all of that may sound confusing right in the beginning, but let's watch this video and hopefully it clarifies it. Thank you. So when we're cleaning, we really want to be able to clean inside, around, all the areas you can, underneath. And there are areas that need cleaning that you just can't see unless you remove a guard. Or for example, this is the air intake housing. And inside that air intake housing, usually the air filter, which is right here, is sitting on top of it. But if you look at that main air intake and you look in the box, it's pretty dirty. If you look a little deeper, you see that there's a hole, and in that hole, or through that hole, a lot of dirt has come inside. And if you think about a Jeep and you think about the height of that air intake, water, where Jeeps sometimes go, can pass somewhere in this engine cavity area as long as that air intake is above it. But if you have a hole, it's not going to function the way it was designed to, and water would be sucked up through that little hole. And that's just a small example, but we call this a hard to reach place. And we want to be able to inspect hard to reach places. So at work, in an industrial setting, you might find some belts on some pulleys that are behind a guard, and you're never going to be able to tell if that belt is wearing until you take that guard off. So some of the process of TPM is to be able to identify hard to reach places and see if there's anything you can do, like put a wire mesh or something to where you can save time, easily inspect and detect any of these issues without having going through the whole process, because out of sight, out of mind. And there's other places on this Jeep, but we will use this one right now as an example of a hard to reach place. So we're going to clean this up. But the first thing you have to realize, if that hole still exists and you clean it and you go drive it, it's going to get dirty again. So we have to do something about it. Okay, first let's just get this thing clean and then we'll go through next steps. Okay, looking good. We got the air filter housing clean. Let's move on. So if you remember, I talked about basic condition being cleaning, it's tightening things and lubricating things. And yes, in TPM there are some phases to this, and there's an aspect of right now we're cleaning to inspect, but there's an aspect of detecting it and then correcting it. But just because there's phases, if you see something, like for example, notice how this air filter housing is loose, I could go ahead and tighten these now. I don't have to go, it's real simple, go ahead and get it done. And don't have to put it on a list to get done later when I have the tools with me right now, and I can accomplish that. One way to communicate or put things on a list in the industrial setting is called tagging. That's putting information on a tag and tying it on the equipment. So even though we tag or document corrective actions, we can also correct things immediately. I mean, it's a good thing to always have record of what you've done. But right here, we've basically eliminated a source of contamination. Dirt cannot flow up there anymore. And we've corrected that. So if there was a tag, we would remove it, show it as complete in an industrial setting, and then we'd move on to the next one. Okay, it's patched, cleaned, and might as well replace the air filter since we're in there. Now let's review. In part one of the series, we really talked about basic conditions and the reason behind TPM. And now in this part two short video, we talked about sources of contamination, hard to reach places, and just to mention right now, tagging. And really it's just a way to communicate, especially in industrial settings, communicate to everyone when you found an issue, you put it on a list, you help categorize it. Is it a safety? Is it a quality? Is it an operations? And then you put it on a list so everybody can put a game plan together to correct it. But when it's your Jeep, well, extending the life of that vehicle, well, that's definitely up to you. We hope this video helped, and if it did, please like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.